um, we're going to bring on our next guest. And our next guest is Jessica Pryde. She's an author and she's a book blogger. And when she comes on camera, I'm going to let her know how we became aware of her and invited her to the show. So, Jessica, welcome to Black Authors Matter TV. And let's unmute so we can hear you.
There we go.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And
Thank
where
you for being here.
Where are you joining us from?
I currently live in Tucson, Arizona.
Tucson, that's where my dad lives.
Oh, come visit anytime.
I got you, girl. Next time I come visit my dad, I'm gonna call you.
Yeah, I've been through there. We were on a road trip a couple of years ago from Houston to San Diego and back. And so we went through Arizona, I-10 and I-40. It's a beautiful state. All different sizes and types of cacti.
And it's hot there too.
It is very, very hot, very, very hot. But it's very beautiful. It's different kind of topography than you get in the region that I live in, which is Houston, the Gulf, or the East Coast. The Arizona, New Mexico area is just totally different from the rest of the country. So it's very beautiful. So is that where you're from originally?
I am actually from DC, and I do miss seasons every once in a while.
Yeah. Well, that's it's a small world. I went to college in DC, so a lot of people go. It used to be Chocolate City. I hear it's not as chocolate as it used to be. So
yeah, I hear it's closer to cappuccino now.
Yeah. I heard the same thing. So Jessica, the way that we became aware of you was there was an article on Book Riot about African American romance, historical romance, decade by decade. And the author of the article, which is, let me see, the name is Anika Klein, mentioned that you led her in the direction of doing something specifically about African American romance historically from decade to decade. So, and they had a list of books they started in the 1900s and different books in different decades. And so that was how we became aware of you. I said, well, if she's on the pulse of things like that, we need to have her on the show.
So historical romance is your jam.
Romance is my jam, and historical, contemporary, fantasy, whatever it is. If there are people falling in love, I'm all for it. Well, falling in love and staying there.
Well, if you remember the story, what was the name of the movie? I forgot the name of the movie. But remember, in the movie, she asked, when did you fall in love with hip hop? So I'm going to ask you, when did you fall in love with romance?
Way too early. I grew up around my mother reading romance novels, so I would peek over her shoulder and then eventually slide into her bookshelves and pull them off. And then I took a break for college and stuff. And then after I went to library school, and after that, I sort of fell back into reading romance, and I've sort of been there ever since.
My mom used to read romances too. She would read historical romance. My mother was a reader like me. And, well, I'm like her. I have to put it like that because my mother was always reading a book. Like after dinner, after everything settled down, before bedtime, she was always reading a book. And she read romances. A lot of them were historical, and a lot of them were just contemporary. And I don't know if I ever read them. I don't think so. I used to read books on my own, but she loved them. And it's a wide audience for romance.
It is. Yeah.
I
There are
think
a lot
some
more too.
people write romance. Some people write what they live.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, Brenda Jackson says she writes what she experienced with growing up with her high school sweetheart, and she married him. She met him when she was 15 or 14, I think she said. And so he's passed away. But she says she lived the romance. But a lot of women are re-romance vicariously to experience it, I'll say. Um, and this just makes you feel good if you
Mm-hmm.
did the boy meets girl story and they get
Well,
together.
that's kind of leads to what I was going to ask. Most people who are romance fans, they feel that romance has to have a certain formula.
Mm-hmm.
If the book does not fall into that formula, it's not a real romance novel. Is that the way you feel about romance, or do you have a more general view of it?
I'd say that I'm not quite as strict about formula, but it does have to have a central love story and a happily ever after. If the people who fall in love don't end up together at the end, somebody dies, somebody leaves, something happens, then that's not really a romance, right? But anything else, as long as those two things are there, then I would call that a romance. Some people are like, it has to follow these beats, or it's not really.
Right.
But I just want people falling in love and staying that way.
Yeah, and what I've seen, the ones that are pretty strict on that formula, boy meets girl, girl can't stand boy.
Mm-hmm.
Some kind of way, boy and girl wind up falling in love. Then there's some huge conflict that tears them apart, but they find their way right back together and they end up happily ever after.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I like those stories though,
Oh
I mean,
yeah,
sometimes
those are some of the
yeah.
best.
Yeah. Sometimes you just want to relax with the story. You don't want to have to think too hard on it. You just want to root for the couple. And I'm cool with that.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. A lot of people like romance isn't my genre. That I read hardly, but it has a huge. I respect it because it has a huge audience. People who write romances, they might write 3 or 4 books a year. That takes a lot of imagination and effort. That's a lot of stories. That's a lot of plots, a lot of characters. It's a lot of work. And now you write romance yourself.
I I have a few on the side that haven't been published yet. I mostly write about romance though.
Okay,
Um,
so your blog, what's the name? What's your blog? The title of your blog?
the title of my blog. Do I have a blog?
Do you
Oh,
have a title?
I so sorry, I confused myself because sometimes I forget that I have a blog. I named it Black Love Matters after the book that I wrote, which is also called Black Love Matters.
Okay, I've seen that cover.
Yeah, it's an essay collection. So I didn't write the whole thing.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
But it features several authors and readers of romance talking about the Black experience in romance. And I started a blog to sort of bring to light some lesser known Black romances as I was reading them. And I fell off on it a little bit. I need to pick back up, and I hope to be able to do that this winter season.
So
Okay, so well, I wanted to find out about the book.
no, you go ahead. You go ahead
Is
first.
the Black Love Matters book, is it romance stories or is it people writing about Black romance stories? Do you
It's
understand
people, yeah, it's people writing about romance. So, for instance, Beverly Jenkins was kind enough to accept my invitation to contribute to it, and she wrote basically a brief history of African American romance from the 1850s to present day, and people have essays about what it was like um, uh, to be queer, looking for Black love stories, what it was like to write Black heroes who weren't the norm, and interestingly, after your conversation with J.L. Campbell about indie romance, Christina C. Jones wrote a great essay that I made the mic drop of the book at the end, about being an indie Black romance author and working with other indies to sort of be the baddest girl in the room. So it's a
The
whole
baddest
range
girl.
of essays.
I like that. The baddest girl in the room.
Mhm.
This Christina Jones, is she the author that is a doctor? Is that the one I'm thinking? Oh, I'm getting mixed up with somebody else. Is she a medical doctor?
I don't think she is. I think she writes
Okay.
full time.
Okay.
I'll
Okay.
have to see who
I'll
is.
look her up because I think I'm thinking of another doctor. But that's an interesting angle in terms of people writing about romance instead of writing romance.
Mm-hmm.
Those essays would be. Now, did you contribute an essay to the book?
I did. I wrote about how interracial romance is sort of the getting to be the norm when maybe it shouldn't be.
I think as time goes on, romance is just starting to look more and more different.
Mm-hmm.
We have interracial, then we also have LGBTQ romance. So we're
Mm-hmm.
going to probably start seeing a lot more of that romance, and they're all going to have their own audience.
Mm-hmm.
I think we had someone on the show who only writes interracial romance books.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did. Was that the author? I can't think of her name, but
I can't remember
her
her name.
husband was white. That
Yes.
one, I can't remember who it was. You're making me go back and look. Hold on, I'm gonna look at my look at
Yeah,
find it.
she
Okay,
did have a white husband, and she wanted to write stories that reflected her relationship. So she only wrote interracial romance.
Yeah.
I
And
guess there's an
I
audience.
have one of those too. He's down the hall watching sports or something. But so I totally like I love being able to see that. It just seems like that's there there are more interracial romances than Black romances when we know that that's not what at
Right.
least American demographics look like. Or at least it feels like the interracial ones are the ones that are getting more marketing, or at least they were in 2022. But
well, in the commercials, especially,
mm-hmm.
it's really more than 50-50. If there's a Black person, they are not necessarily going to be with a Black person, be
Mm-hmm.
it male or female, either way. But especially Black men in commercials.
Well,
That
I almost like that because I remember growing up watching the soap operas. Yeah, I say growing up watching the soap operas because
Oh, same.
my mama was watching it, my grandmother was watching it, I was watching it too. I got into it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you remember, there was always one Black couple. They could never break up, and if
Mm-hmm.
they did break up, they brought another Black person on the show.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know, that's funny, but true.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to find who that was, and I can't right now. I'm
Yeah,
looking
I
at.
don't remember her name, but I just remember, and she said that was
Oh, here
those
she
were the only
is.
romances. You found her?
Tracy Livesay. Wasn't that her? It was Tracy.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know who we're talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've
Yes.
read some of her books. I think I have all of her books, but I haven't read them all yet.
Okay. She said
Sounds like
that.
a true reader. We have the books. We haven't
Yeah,
always
that's
read them.
true. That is true. But she said that the not every interracial couple has to be based on. She wanted just to have normal people meeting and getting to know each other and liking each other instead of it having to have some component with a racial struggle or a
Mm-hmm.
Right.
movement or
They're just two
demonstration.
people who happened to fall in love, and they didn't have to overcome racial barriers to get there.
Right.
Right. Right.
They just had something in common, and there was a connection. A love connection. So now you have a lot of books on your shelf there behind you.
I
And
do.
that's
This is my keeper
part of
shelf.
your
Oh,
okay.
that's your keeper. Oh, so you don't keep every book that you read.
I don't. That would
Can you do
be,
giveaways on the blog, maybe?
I could. But I don't right now because like I said, I sort of fell behind on everything. Um, I do run a local romance book club that I often give books to when we meet in every month.
Nice.
Um,
Oh,
but
okay.
giveaways, I will have to plan some giveaways in the future.
Now, is your book club interracial, or is
Yeah.
it okay? So interesting. So how when you all get together and meet and talk about romances, um, how how are those conversations? Like, what's something about those conversations that could be different or interesting that we might, if we were like a fly on the wall?
Those conversations can get rowdy. We we instead of talking about a specific book, since there are so many romances, we have meetings by trope. So for instance, we might have a whole conversation about books that have an only one bed trope. So every book that we talk about has had some instance where the story was moved forward by the main characters having to share a room that has one bed, whether they end up sharing the bed, one of them sleeps on the floor, whatever. So that was just one of the examples. We've had some much broader types of conversation, but those talks can be about how the anything from how the books actually are written to whether or not we believe the chemistry in the books, to whether or not the spicy times are actually like interesting and satisfying in the books. So when I
Well,
say they can get a little rowdy, there's
I'm kind of with you on those last 2 points. I don't like it when the couples fall in love because the author said, okay, it's time for them to fall in love.
Mhm.
You know, they were just arguing or they didn't really know each other, and then all of a sudden, boom, they're in love. And I'm like, okay, can I go on this journey with you? This journey to love. How did you fall in love so quickly? And I think
Mhm.
sometimes that's what bothers me about some romance novels is they don't give us an opportunity to go through that journey with them so we can actually care about the couple. I want to believe that they're in love.
Yeah. I was having a conversation recently about how some books now, whether traditional or indie published, are more about what the topic is and what the beats are and the tropes are than the actual way that the story flows. So yeah, it's like the author says that they're falling in love, but really they just gave us one bed and a snowstorm and said they're going to be stuck together and eventually they're going to be together.
I never really thought about that one bad thing. Now,
Now
every
I
time I
can't
read
stop
a
thinking
book,
about the one bed.
yeah, every time I read a book, I'm going to think about you, and I'm going to say, "Oh, there it is, one bed again."
Yeah, I didn't even, I didn't even know that there were tropes, romance tropes. So this is,
Mhm.
well, tropes is kind of a newer term that is being used more and more just in general,
Mhm.
but I never thought about there being tropes in romance, that just, it's interesting. I think about the plot being generally the same, but I never
Mhm.
thought about tropes. So that's really interesting. And it's an
Yeah.
interesting angle for a book club, especially one that specializes in one genre like that.
Right.
Yeah, because then people can say, well, we're talking about enemies to lovers romances this time. I hate enemies to lovers, or I love enemies to lovers. Why do you hate it? Why do you love it? What's interesting about it? What aggravates you about it? And those kinds of conversations can happen too.
Yeah, I just finished reading a book about um this couple. They were supposedly enemies, couldn't stand each other, and then all of a sudden they fell in love. And I was like, wait a minute, when did they fall in love?
All of a sudden, click.
Yeah, I wonder how common that actually is. That
Mhm.
two enemies fall in love. I wonder in the real life how common is.
But they say there's a thin line between love and hate.
Yeah,
And
but I
it
think
just
that
it
this
just so
line
happened in the
happens
book.
after they fall in love and
Mhm.
something goes on.
Well, it's just so happens in the book that I was reading that both of them were very attractive and they couldn't stop noticing how attractive each other.
So one, it was a race to see who was in the mirror the most. Or
No, they were attracted to each other, and they, I can't stand him, but he looks good.
I hate the
oh,
fact that I love looking at him.
Right.
well, in a romance, everybody's attracted. Isn't
Yeah,
that?
True.
I mean, more or less.
more or less. And people are writing books that have like more like regular looking people, I guess you call it. More guys with dad bods and people with different kinds of bodies, but they're always beautiful no matter what.
Yes,
So
yes, yes.
So
Because
when are you writing your love story? I know you said you wrote some books and you put them to the side. When are we going to see your book?
well, I've got a couple that I'm drafting and revisiting every once in a while. And I actually do have a short story that is a romance that's coming out in a collection called Something Generous next
Okay.
year. It's with a new small press that's focused on uplifting the voices of BIPOC, queer, and disabled writers. And
Nice.
it's Generous Press is the name of the press, and so their first anthology is called Something Generous.
And are they located in Arizona?
They're not, I'm not sure where they are centrally located. Um,
Mm.
everything that all the work I've done with them has been online.
That goes to show you how small our world is getting. You don't have to be in the same city as your publisher, your publicist. Your whole team can be all over the country.
yeah,
Yep.
all over. And I can attest to that. Even with this show, everybody's in
Mhm.
different location. Although the media manager is in town.
That's good to
But
have.
yeah, but that is the beauty of being able to pull a team together of talented people. They can be
Mhm.
anywhere, and so
Right.
that's helpful.
Yeah.
So when you came to the attention of the writer, did they seek you out? Did you bring the historical fiction angle to their attention with the different decades, or did they seek you out? How did that transpire?
I actually also write for Book Riot. I probably should have mentioned that at the beginning.
Mhm.
So I think when Annika was writing that list, she did a little bit of crowdsourcing with other Book Riot writers, asking about specific titles, and I think I mentioned the Decades series because it is such an ideal historical romance series where one person just writes a specific decade, and all the way through the 20th century. So I mentioned those to her when she was writing a different historical fiction list, and then
Mhm.
she decided to separate those out into discussing.
Yeah, a lot of times, if we don't have a list that's specifically with African American literature,
Mm-hmm.
we won't get mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Right.
the general list, somehow we get overlooked. And then they might bring in one, just so they look at it and say, okay, this is a very non-inclusive list. Let's let's add one person. So they'll have one person in there, but a lot of times we need to have our own list just to give people the recognition
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah,
they
that's
otherwise would not get.
that's the challenge. And you're right that if they say just pick 10 authors, often Black people will not be included in those 10 authors unless we specifically say 10 Black authors. Or if the Black author is super, super famous, like they might say
Right.
something like Maya Angelou, you know,
Right.
something like that.
Right. Or
Yeah.
Toni Morrison, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's
Well,
a good fallback.
one thing that is good about Book Riot is that they really do try to like diversify their lists as much as possible.
That's good.
Yeah, so I think they it's almost a requirement, I think, to make sure that if you're writing about something, you have authors of color and books about people of color to write about, even if it's not specifically Black authors.
Mhm.
But
Well, we have a number of authors who watch this show. Um, from your experience, what would be your advice to someone who would want to get the attention of a book right?
oh, Book Riot, there are a lot of people who write for Book Riot. So I would say, depending on what you specifically write about, look and see who's writing about that, because I think Book Riot has about 200 contributors now. And if there's something that really resonates with you, that they've written, reach out to them. And, I can't guarantee that you're always going to hear back. And
But you won't hear back if you don't call or if you don't write to them.
right. But definitely like find people in your wheelhouse. Like I said, we talk about how I'm a romance person, and publicists have reached out to me about, war memoirs and things like that. And I'm like, what made you think that I want to write about war memoirs? But
That's
but
true. You specifically have said, I mean, and everything that you talk about is about romance. So
mhm.
yeah, and it's good to specialize in something, especially something you enjoy.
Yeah,
Right.
Well, Jessica, we're at the end of our time. We want you to show your book again,
absolutely. Black Love Matters.
Black Love Matters, and
Love.
it's a collection of essays about Black romances. And Jessica, your work can be found at bookriot.com, correct?
It can. Bookriot.com.
Okay, and it's riot like a riot, RIOT, book riot.com. And you can find out more about her and follow her work there. And we'll be on the lookout for your release of a romance in the future.
Thank you. Thank you again for having me. It was great talking with both of you.
Well, it was great talking with you as well. It was great meeting you, and we'll be in touch. We're almost cousins now.
Yes. Yes, we are.
Okay, have a great evening.
Thanks. You too.
Bye-bye.
Okay, good night.